All right. So with that, thank you all for coming to today's workshop. Like I mentioned, if you are here for extra credit, make sure to stick around until the very end for the evaluation link and to also provide our lovely presenter with feedback about today's workshop. And without further ado, today's workshop is going to be on the art of studenting, transitioning from online to in-person learning. I'm going to go ahead and give the virtual mic to Kelsey. Woo!
Thank you so much, Zaria. So welcome, everyone. I want to echo the welcomes and thank you so much for being here today. So as Zaria said, this is the art of studenting, transitioning from online learning to in-person learning. Just a little bit about me. My name is Kelsey Pais, and I am an adjunct faculty member here. I teach communication studies, mostly out of the San Ramon campus, but occasionally at the Pleasant Hill campus as well. And in addition, I am also the faculty tutoring coordinator for the San Ramon campus, which essentially means that I help run the tutoring center in the academic support center here at San Ramon. And I have taught in a number of modalities over the course of my teaching career. Of course, I started out as an in-person instructor, but I've also been teaching online since 2018, and I started teaching back on campus last semester. So I thought that I would be able, I was in a pretty decent position to be able to provide students with some sort of tips and tricks for success in managing that transition from learning comfortably online in your own bed to getting dressed, driving, and coming to campus every day. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, share my Google Slides, and I'm going to make it so I can see everybody. And like Zaria said, if you feel comfortable enough to turn your camera on, I would love to see some faces, but names are fine too. So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the art of studenting. Let me put that into actually slideshow mode. And as I said, I am Kelsey Pais. I am an instructor in communication studies. So little agenda for you today. We are going to talk about some tips for success in managing the tricky transition to coming back onto campus, or perhaps coming to campus for the first time for some of you. So we're going to talk first about the importance of making a schedule, the importance of getting and staying organized, how to take notes in your classes, in your on-person classes, and how that differs from taking notes online, studying effectively, so some study tips, staying engaged with your classes and getting engaged with resources on campus, as well as minding your mindset and keeping track of your mental health as well. So first things first is setting a schedule for yourself, making and keeping a schedule. And the very first thing that you want to keep in mind is just to be realistic. This transition to in-person learning is going to be difficult, right? It's going to take a lot more energy out of your body than you might anticipate. And so you want to realistically anticipate your load. So for example, 12 units is considered full-time for students, but you don't want to try to take on too much in your first semester. Some students take 15, 18 units per semester, and that just might be too much if you are making the transition back in person. So it might be wise to kind of start off slow, right? If you plan on taking 12 units, maybe take 6 or 9 of those in person, as opposed to trying to go full force back into in-person learning. Because figuring out the schedule, figuring out the campus, it might take a bit to get acclimated. In addition, you want to keep track of time each day and keep track of the assignments in your classes so that you don't fall behind in those classes. More and more often, I think that you're going to see classes take on more online elements, even though those classes are in person. So for example, in my teaching, I have been using online quizzes since 2017, 2018. And I think that now that many instructors have seen and used some of these tools and become familiar with them, you might still have some assignments that are due online. And so you want to, keep track of the schedules for each of your classes, keep track of the major assignments that are due each week, keep track of the bigger projects that are due less frequently, and just make sure that you don't fall behind. In addition, you want to take location into consideration. This is something that is definitely very different when it comes to learning in person. You have to work in time for commuting to campus and walking in from the parking lots and parking your car in the parking lots. And that can take a lot of time. I know that in a regular semester at the Pleasant Hill campus, especially, parking is a madhouse. It's absolutely wild. And oftentimes you want to give yourself a pretty wide berth to be able to get to class on time. You want to give yourself plenty of time to find a parking space and be able to walk in from the parking lot. In addition, right, commuting. It's kind of become a lost art in the world of online learning. And so you can't just roll out of bed at 8:59 and expect to make it to your 9 o'clock class on time anymore. As an example of this, I just returned to one of my other campuses for the first time today. They had transitioned online for the first 3 weeks, and now they are back in person again. And I was looking in the days ahead before I had to head out there to see the sort of regular traffic patterns according to Google Maps. And I noticed that it usually takes about 45 minutes to drive out there on a good day. And so, I gave myself a little cushion. I left maybe an hour 15 before my first class began, so that I had enough time to park my car, walk in, get acclimated, all of those sorts of things, and give time for potential traffic accidents and things like that. So it's important to leave earlier than you might expect, and to work in the time for doing all of those sorts of things. It's also important to factor in time for things to take care of your body. Time for lunch, time for snacks, time for bathroom breaks, right? And oftentimes there isn't enough time in between classes to be able to take care of those things. Here at DVC, we tend to have about 10 minutes between each class, so that's enough time to, take a quick bathroom break, maybe eat a snack on your way from class to class. But it's not that long, right? And the Pleasant Hill campus especially is pretty large. So you want to take the location of your classes into consideration, right? If you're in the math building and you have to make it all the way over to like the, the language arts buildings or something, or maybe the BFL, that's a long walk. So you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to be able to get in between your classes. It's also important, of course, to carve out time to do things like study for your classes and complete the homework. And also, oftentimes students are working in addition to taking their classes. And so you want to create a schedule that allows you to be able to get as many hours in at work that you need to do in order to sustain yourself, but also making sure that you aren't burning yourself out, right? That you aren't taking on too much all at once. Ultimately, the schedule that works best is the one that you will actually follow. So if you are creating a schedule, if you are, for example, creating an actual like planner, right? You don't want to use a paper planner if you're one of those people who buys a paper planner every year and then forgets about it by January 15th. And so you want to ultimately use the tools that are best suited for your needs. So you can use a calendar on your phone, you can use a computer calendar, you can use a paper planner, scheduling apps. There are so many different options when it comes to creating a daily schedule, a weekly schedule, what have you. And personally, I use Google. I use Google Calendar because I can access my Google Calendar on my work computer, on my home computer, on my phone, right? It's everywhere. It syncs across the cloud. And so it's really handy for me. I have all of my classes listed in there. I have all of the meetings that I have to go to. I had this workshop, for example, in my calendar, and it reminded me half an hour before this meeting started, that I had this meeting. And so there's lots of tools that are out there that can really be helpful to you. But if you're one of those people that doesn't like technology, like there is a reason that you're taking in-person classes, it might be more appropriate for you to use a paper planner because that's just more your style. So just things to keep in mind, right? That ultimately there is no wrong way to go about this. Any questions so far? Okay. So use the tool that best suits your needs. The tool that best suits my needs is Google Calendar. The tool that suits your needs might be something different. But you want to set out that schedule, right? Set out when your classes are, set out, the important assignments perhaps, right? Set reminders for yourself when those assignments are due, things like that. Because that can really help you to succeed. Okay. So up next, let's talk about getting organized. So one of the things that is definitely true with regard to in-person learning is that we have a lot less than we do in online classes, right? Like I was saying before, you can't just get up at 8:59 for a 9 o'clock class and make it to class on time. And so one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to organize your supplies in a way that makes sense to you. So me personally, I like to have individual folders or notebooks for each individual class. Maybe you have a larger notebook that has tabs in it that you can separate for each class. But you want to keep all of these things in one place. Whether that's your notebooks or your pens or your highlighters or your textbooks, whatever you've got, keeping it in one place, like one backpack that you keep in the same place every day, can help you to, get out of the house a little bit quicker each day. I like to set myself up the night before I have to leave for class. So I check my backpack, I make sure my laptop is in there, I make sure I have all my folders, I make sure that I have my flash drives that I need, right? I just go through and check my bag every night before I have to go to work the next day. And having all of my materials in one place makes it really easy for me to be able to just grab and go. In addition, you want to make sure that you aren't forgetting things like your handy dandy little KN95, right? Or other face masks that BBC recommends. A lot of the classrooms and stuff do have hand sanitizer in them, but it's never a bad thing to bring your own. I like to keep an extra mask in my car, in my bag, in my purse, so that just in case one day I run out of the house and forget to grab a fresh mask, I have one on standby ready to go, so that I can still, go to class and teach. So you want to make sure that you have all of those supplies nice and organized for yourself. It's also a good idea to organize your class content, right? To look ahead on the schedules for your various classes and figure out when the due dates are for important assignments, and to mark those down in whatever planner or calendar it is that you are using. I personally liked to, when I was a student, I liked to print out the syllabus and print out the schedule and keep those documents in the folder or in the notebook for that specific class, so that I could very easily just grab that notebook, flip it open, and find the information that I needed. I even went so far as to, have a highlighter and highlight through the different weeks that we were going through, or like underline or circle important assignments and things like that. So again, you just have to find those techniques that work the best for you, because you want to create habits that you will actually keep up, as opposed to aiming for habits that you just aren't going to follow through on. It's also a good idea to take note of each professor that you have and when where their office is and what their office hours are, because we're going to talk a little bit later about staying engaged with your professors, and visiting them in office hours and doing stuff like that. But taking note of this stuff early on, and maybe even visiting their office early on, can help to start to build that rapport with your professor so that if you do have issues later on, you know where to go and you know how to easily find that person. And then finally, I recommend reviewing the course calendar at least once per week to see what is on tap for that week. So I have on the left here a screenshot of my syllabus from this week. This is the course schedule from my syllabus. And as you can see, we are in week 3 right now. So my students are covering chapters 4, 5, and 6 this week. They have a quiz due this Sunday. They have their first speech due in a few weeks' time. They have to submit a topic proposal for that speech, right? But keeping track of this schedule and keeping track of where you are in the schedule can really help you to stay organized as well. And we just had someone join us. Welcome. This is the Art of Studenting workshop, transitioning back to in-person learning. So any questions with getting organized? Okay. And if you want to give me nonverbal feedback just to let me know that like you're doing okay, that you're following along, you can give me the thumbs up or the green check mark or anything along those lines, just that I know that, you know, things are making sense to us and that we're not asleep. Awesome. Thank you, Christina and Sarah. I appreciate that feedback. All right. Yes, and chat also works, except I have to figure out how to get the chat on my screen because my screen is not quite big enough. I'm on a much smaller screen than the one that I'm used to. All right. So let's go ahead and talk then about taking notes in your in-person class. This is another one of those things that has definitely changed over the course of the last 2 years. Because with Zoom classes, we have become conditioned to the fact that the class is going to be recorded and that the teacher's going to post a link and that we can just go back to the recording if there was anything that we needed to go back over. But newsflash, your in-person classes are most likely not going to be recorded, right? So you really do have to be paying attention during your classes and minding your attention span, right? If you are just transitioning back to in-person learning, maybe taking a 3-hour lecture course isn't the right move, right? Because our attention spans have gotten a lot shorter over the course of this pandemic. And you can't as easily like get up and take a stretch break in the middle of class. So try to find the classes that work best for your brain as well, and maybe stick with the the hour 25 classes rather than jumping straight into the 3-hour courses. So you just that's just something to be aware of. So like I was saying, classes aren't recorded in real life, at least in most cases. When you are listening to a professor give a lecture, it's important to try to take down the key information that the instructor is giving you, rather than trying to take down a word-for-word iteration of what the teacher said. Because not everything that we say is important. You know, I give a number of examples and tell stupid jokes in my classes that my students definitely don't need to be writing down. But you can look out for cues from your professor to signify what is important to listen to. If your teacher uses a PowerPoint or similar presentation, if they use slides, the words on those slides are often things that they are focusing on for that particular lesson. And so writing down the things that are on the slides is important. But it's also important to write down the things that your instructor is saying, because I know that for me, usually with my slides, I don't put full definitions or full explanations on my slideshows. I will often just put part of a sentence or part of an idea to remind me of what I wanted to talk about, but explain it and extrapolate on it further in class. And so you can listen for cues from your professor. For example, they might say, this is going to be on the exam, or this is on the quiz. They might say that this is important. If the instructor gets really animated or excited about something, that tells you that it's important. If the instructor repeats themselves or writes something on the board, that is something that is likely going to be important for you to know. It's also a good idea to look at how your instructor is organizing the information that they're giving you. For example, they might say, here are the categories of X, and there's 3 categories, 1, 2, 3. So first, let's talk about Y, right? And so if you pay attention to that structure that your instructor is giving you, that might also provide you with some cues as to what's important to follow along with and what maybe you can zone out on just a little bit, right? Maybe if you got the idea through the first example that your teacher gave, the second example might not be relevant for you, right? That sort of thing. When you are taking notes, it's always a good idea to write down your interpretation of what you've learned, rather than trying to copy down the exact words that your instructor said. And this is because it might be that your instructor said something in a slightly confusing way. And so if you write down the words for yourself, and if you kind of put the words into your own words, that makes it stick more in your brain because you're using your language to explain this concept to yourself. And so writing down your interpretation is always going to be better than trying to copy things down word for word. Now, there's a big debate about taking notes on a laptop or an iPad versus taking notes on paper. And there's been multiple studies that have demonstrated that taking notes on paper is kind of edges out to retention and remembering the things that were said in a class. But ultimately, again, it's what matters to you, right? Whatever is the tool that works best for you is the tool that you should use. Also, do keep in mind, however, that some instructors do have some pretty strict technology rules within their classrooms. Some teachers won't even let you use a laptop or another device to take notes. They only allow a notebook and pencil. But for example, for me, with my students, I tell them to use whatever tool works best for them, as long as they are using that tool for the purposes of furthering learning, right? If I suddenly hear a random YouTube video being played, right, that's probably not related to the class that we are teaching. I once had a student who was watching football highlights in class, and I had to ask them to put their laptop away, right, because they weren't using it for classroom purposes. So ultimately, it doesn't matter if you use a laptop or paper. It's whatever works best for you and whatever your instructor allows. So those are my hot tips on taking notes, right? Take down the key information, write it in your own words, and use the tool that works best for you. Any questions on that? Okay. Wonderful. So now that we've talked about taking notes, let's talk about using those notes to study effectively in your in-person classes. One of the most important things that you can do when you are studying for a class is to make sure that you are not just putting information into your brain. One of the best things you can do is to try to draw that information back out of your brain. And this is what we refer to as retrieval practice, right? We're drawing that information, we're retrieving that information from our brains and reminding ourselves of what we've learned and showing ourselves that we have in fact learned that information. So there's a number of different things that we can do that sort of qualify as retrieval practice, that practice drawing these things out of our brains once we've learned them. For example, we could use the 2 things rule. So this practice is essentially as soon as a lecture finishes or as soon as you finish a reading of a chapter, you should write down in your notebook 2 things that you remember from that lesson, right? The 2 big takeaways that you have from either the lecture or from the chapter. And that is kind of showing to yourself, okay, this is what I've taken in and this is what I'm putting out, right? These are the 2 things that I remember the most. So write down 2 things that you remember from your lecture or your book. In addition, another retrieval practice that we can use is to learn by teaching. So essentially, explain what you've learned to a friend. One of the best ways for us to learn something is to try to explain it to someone else, because that not only shows that we have understood the subject at hand, but we understand it well enough to be able to have a conversation with someone else about it. And that really demonstrates that you have studied effectively, right? That you have effectively learned this information. Another great retrieval practice is using flashcards. Now, it's important when you are using flashcards that you're not just looking at the card and immediately flipping it over, right? When you are using flashcards, you should be looking at the card, saying the answer out loud to yourself, right? If you're trying to define a term and you have the definition, say what that term is, then flip it over and check what that term is to make sure that you've got it correct. Because that is you drawing that information out, right? And checking that you have properly understood the information. And one last thing that we can do is called purposeful forgetting. Essentially, with this retrieval practice, we study a chapter in our textbook or we read over our notes, and then we set a timer and walk away, right? Maybe we set a timer for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, right? We go do something else for a while, and then we come back and see how well that information has stuck, right? So it's kind of, the idea is like you set a timer, take a break, and get back to work, right? This practice helps things to kind of simmer a little bit in your brain, and it helps them to settle. And it demonstrates that you are actually remembering the information that you have gathered, as opposed to just regurgitating it, right? Because if you are just reading and studying and like saying the things out loud to yourself, that's all well and good, but you might only remember it in that specific moment, right? As soon as the book is closed, if you aren't studying effectively, that information might go directly out of your head. But with this retrieval practice of purposeful forgetting, right, you are purposefully setting it to one side and walking away so that you can kind of test yourself later and make sure that that knowledge has settled. So is all of this making sense? Am I going too fast? Are we doing okay? All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for that feedback. Wonderful. Okay. So now that we've talked about, getting to campus and taking notes effectively and studying effectively, let's talk about how you can stay engaged on campus. So we're going to talk about staying engaged with your classmates, staying engaged with your professor, and staying engaged on campus. So first, with your classmates. One of my favorite things that has come back with in-person learning is that we get to see each other. We get to be all in the same space, and we get to, turn to the person who is sitting next to us and say hello, which isn't something that, folks were doing too much in the online spaces. And so one of the best things that you can do to take advantage of the fact that you are taking classes in person is to get to know the people around you, right? To chat with them before and after class, to work with them effectively in in-person discussions and activities that might happen in class, to maybe form study groups with the people around you so that you can work effectively together to use those retrieval practices that we were talking about and things like that, right? So you can form study groups, you can exchange contact information with the students around you, and hang out outside of class, all of those sorts of things. Another thing that you can do is to meet new people, especially, is to join clubs and organizations and to attend any events that might be happening on campus. More and more, our campuses are starting to have in-person events. I know that this coming Tuesday, I think it is, both the Pleasant Hill and the San Ramon campuses of DVC are hosting a resource fair. And so you can go to that fair, meet other students, gather resources that are available on campus, and those sorts of things. And there's tons of clubs that are still really active. Some of them are only active on Zoom still, but some of them are starting to come back on campus. So just things to keep in mind when it comes to, the options that you have. And I believe that another person has just joined us. Welcome. We are about halfway through the art of studenting, transitioning from online to in-person learning. And right now we're talking about staying engaged with our classmates. So we've been talking about joining clubs and organizations. Zaria, you're wonderful. Zaria has just dropped a link for the resource fair that is happening next week. So make sure you check that out. So join clubs, organizations, attend events in person to meet your fellow students, to meet those other people who are taking classes in person. So another thing that you can take advantage of learning in person is staying more engaged with your professor. One of the best things you can do, we love it when students participate in class and share their own perspectives, because I know personally, I know that my perspective is often very limited just because of who I am, right? And so I love it when my students share their perspectives about the things that we are learning, because it makes it more relevant for those particular students. So participate in class, raise your hand during discussions, ask questions if you're confused about something, those sorts of things. Another important tip is to attend the office hours that your instructor hosts. I said earlier that you should familiarize yourself with where your instructor holds their office hours. And I encourage you to visit your professors during their office hours. For the most part, we're just sitting in our offices by ourselves, right? Waiting for students to come by. It's a great opportunity for you to bring an assignment that you've been struggling with, ask what's coming up on an upcoming exam, talk about things that are unrelated to the class, right? Those sorts of things. And it can be really intimidating to come to an instructor's office hours, because it's kind of admitting that you need help or that you don't get it. But that's what we're here for, right? We are here to help our students to succeed. We want to help our students to succeed. And we can't do that if you're not asking questions when you're confused. So stop by our office hours, chat with us. We love to see you. And this is especially great if you are, for example, planning to transfer, because oftentimes schools need letters of recommendation from professors. And so it's real awkward when a professor gets, you know, a form letter from a school saying so-and-so has asked for a letter of recommendation, and you're like, who are they? So it really helps to build that rapport with your instructor. And if you need a letter of recommendation, to ask them first before you put in their contact information, so that they can write you a really glowing recommendation, and so that they know who you are when you ask for that recommendation as well. So really take advantage of being around your professor and your classmates. And then finally, you can stay engaged with your campus. So first, find out where information about your campus is posted. On DVC, we have the rotating carousel on the front page, and that tells you a lot of important information about returning to campus, about events that might be happening on campus. I think there's also like calendar events that are listed on the front page. So it might be on the school's website, it might be on your class's Canvas page, but find out where that information is posted consistently, and then check those places consistently so that you can find out what's happening on campus. Another hot tip is to check your student email. Students don't tend to check their Insight emails super frequently, but it is fairly easy to set it up on your phone so that you can check it regularly. I recommend checking it at least once a day to make sure that you are getting important announcements from your classes. DVC sends out a really helpful newsletter to students every week that tells them sort of the important things to keep in mind for that week. And so there are some things that you might be missing if you're not checking your Insight email. And I think you can also have your Insight emails forwarded to an email that you check more regularly, but I'm not 100% certain about that. And then in addition, you want to utilize the campus or the resources that are available on campus. So for example, there might be library services that are only available on campus, like checking out books. You can get academic advising and tutoring in person on both the Pleasant Hill and the San Ramon campus. And I know because I work with my tutors in person here on a weekly basis. right? So there are still a lot of resources that are available in online spaces because a lot of our students are still in online spaces, but more and more we're starting to transition back into those in-person resources. So I think you'll start to see like a hybrid situation where you can get resources available online, you can get in-person sources, and some might only be available in one space or the other. But it's important to just learn the ropes of the institution and learn the resources that are available to you and that can ultimately help you to get through and to, figure out what you need to do in order to attain your educational goals. Any questions about staying engaged in in-person cases? Okay. So then finally today, learn the ropes of the institution. Forgot that one. I said it, I just forgot that I put it on the slide. Okay. So finally, I want to talk about minding your mindset and really just like keeping track of not only your physical health, but also your mental health. It's really important for us to figure out and find that balance between schoolwork and our other responsibilities, such as our jobs or our families, and to try to find that balance so that we can avoid burnout. Because having such a hard transition between can be a lot. It's a lot of energy. I know that I'm probably going to be exhausted by the end of this week because it's my first week teaching fully back in person, right? And so we need to take that time to really just take care of ourselves, right? To get some sleep, to eat a balanced meal, right? To nourish our bodies and nourish our souls. Because things like sleep deprivation and hunger, emotional struggles can make it really difficult for us to learn. It makes it really hard for us to get up in the morning and go to class and put in the work and put in the effort to be able to succeed. And really, tiredness and hunger can take up space in our brains that would otherwise be used for learning. So it is important to nourish our bodies so that we can nourish our minds as well. As I was saying, it's also important for us to monitor our physical health. You've heard it once and you've heard it 1,000 times, right? Stay home if you are sick. If you are taking in-person classes and you have symptoms of COVID-19 or if you test positive for COVID-19, please make sure that you are following the instructions of your professors, that you are letting them know if you test positive so that we can put the proper protocols in place. And that if you even have like the slightest inkling that you are sick, please stay home. Don't spread that, right? Usually we like to spread the love, but not in this case. And when we are prioritizing our health, it's really just important for us to do what is most healthy for our minds and what is most healthy for our spirits. There are going to be some days where it just feels like it's too much, and we have to acknowledge when our body is telling us that it's too much, and perhaps take a mental health day when necessary, right? Do what is healthy for you. It's also really important for us to not be too hard on ourselves because you will make mistakes. It's almost a guarantee, right? It's like part of the human condition that we make mistakes. And so it's important for us to embrace our failures and to recognize that failure is not the end. This is going to be difficult. Moving from online to in-person learning, it's going to be hard, right? And so if we fail at trying something new, that's okay because at least we were trying, right? And from every single failure that we have, that's a lesson that we can learn, right? And as long as we are learning from those failures and we are growing from those failures, that's the thing that matters the most because the ultimate goal is learning, right? The ultimate goal is growing. And it can be really hard to hear negative things about ourselves, right? To get negative feedback from an instructor, for example, especially when it means that you got an F on the assignment, for example. But being hard on yourself about that really only makes the experience worse, right? It's not the end of the world if you fail on an assignment, or even if you fail a class, because guess what? You can try again, right? Our lives are hard enough right now as it is, right? So we don't need to make things harder on ourselves by beating ourselves up over mistakes that we're making. It's also important to know when you should reach out for help. Stress is really common, but it can be hard for us to recognize when it becomes something that is clinically treatable, like anxiety or depression, right? And so it's important to watch out for, the classic signs of those things, like having trouble sleeping or waking up, trouble eating, feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness even, abusing substances like drugs or alcohol, or having these really bad mental health reactions. Our college has really great mental health resources available for students. We have counselors who are ready to talk to you, even on an emergency basis, right? They can push aside other appointments that they might be having to take care of a student who is really in need. And so it's important to recognize within yourself and let go of that stigma that surrounds mental health, because we are all going to face challenges. And we have to be ready and willing to reach out when we do need help. And so mental health issues are pervasive among college students, and they are nothing to be ashamed of. If you need help, get it. And then finally, we need to make sure that we are being adaptable, right? We want to be both mentally and physically ready for change. As we know, COVID-19 is an ongoing situation, right? This is an ongoing pandemic, and things change week by week and sometimes day by day. And so I don't think that it will be the case, but it could very well be the case that schools go back online for one reason or another. And so we have to be ready for that and ready to make that transition and transition back and be able to pivot and do all of these sort of things that we've been doing for the last 2 years. And so, it's just important for us to be adaptable and to be flexible in those ways. And then finally, we want to stay curious, right? We want to find something interesting in every single thing that we are doing. There is a reason that you came to college. There is a reason that you are taking the classes that you are taking, whether those are just general education classes or classes for your major. There's a reason that you're taking them. And so in those classes, even if it's a general education class, stay curious, right? Find that thing that is very interesting to you about that general education course and make that your focus in the course, right? Keep learning, stay curious, and that is ultimately what will help you make it through. Any questions about minding your mindset, taking care of your health, your mental health, staying curious, anything along those lines? All right. Thank you so much for that nonverbal feedback. So that's all that I have for us today. Thank you all again so much for coming. I realize that we're a little bit early. I maybe spoke a little bit more quickly than I thought I might. But Zaria, did you want to give them the closing information that they need?